Now, with this trial specifically, what we're finding on this Kyle Rittenhouse trial is we're finding that most people are actually looking at what they think of the case is that they think that the case was decided specifically on what actually happened on the on what happened from when the actual what they would see as what the trial started at to what the trial ended at and everything in between. Frankly, this is not the case. What people need to understand is you might have seen one part of what caused something, but not all of it. This is something that's very, very important to understand. You only saw one part of what was actually a major factor. Now, what most people are discussing is they feel that uh, the one the narrow of the scope was something of the problem. Not really. The narrowing of the scope was of the case was really a limited basis. Uh, that was really not even. I don't even think that comes into play with its. Uh, it's really more of a minor thing of more of a broad spectrum of what was really going on in the case. And it goes down to, first of all, is what was really going on in the atmosphere in the courtroom. First of all, we need to go with what the judge was doing. What the judge was doing with it was basically showing deference to the defense. This could have been seen by anyone out there with it that was completely objective. If you're looking at it from not having a point of view from either side, just really looking for the facts in the case, which is the way I was looking at it from the start. I didn't know what was going on with it. I had a feeling there was what it called that it was not self-defense with it, but I was not fully decided yet with it. I was willing to give it the self-defense option out there. Uh, and because the fact is I felt that any reasonable person would not go out there and would not go out there with these right wing agitators. If you're one of the agitators with it, I did not really have much sympathy for you. So I would not. So I was not really sympathetic toward his thing to begin with. But if it was a case of self-defense that they could actually prove it, I would have accepted the case as the facts would have proven this. And we don't see this. But what we were seeing by the actual judge, we were actually seeing, first of all, when it comes to semantics, this is a big one. This is one of the major parts we were seeing. This is in semantics. This means basically the wording of how we were able to see the actual uh, persona of the victims and next to the persona of the accused. The accused was always to be perceived as a victim of the trial, and that this was something in which the judge was making sure that this happened, that no negative statements could be made on the victims, on the accused character, but they could actually make negative statements on those who are actually victims in the crime, which is pretty much never allowed to happen. This is basically in what we would call putting your thumb on the scale, because you're trying to essentially push for an outcome. You are actually trying to lead the jury to come with a specific outcome of the trial, meaning that the judge was biased going into the trial. He actually wanted an acquittal, and he's trying to push that. We saw this when he had a specific idea in what the two sides could talk about. Uh, whenever the prosecution violated this, with it, he would go after the prosecution. But if the defense did this, there was no talk on the prosecution when or there's no talk on the defense. When the prosecution would bring this up, he would actually yell at the prosecution for dare bringing it up. And this is something in which we would never see in a courtroom. You would never see this type of attitude from a judge in a courtroom. This is something in which shows that Judge Schroeder should never even be a judge in my district of District 1. He has no business being a judge whatsoever. And nor should he have actually been there with it. It was shown that he was completely not only incompetent, but actually biased in the trial. He was showing his incompetence, that he didn't understand the difference between an augmented video or photographs and actual usage of like a pinch to zoom technology, which is basically is no more than using a magnifying glass, because it doesn't actually change the actual quality. It actually, you don't actually get better quality on the video. You actually lose your actual quality when you're zooming, but you actually get just a close-up view. That's merely what you're doing. You actually lose quality. That's merely what you're doing. You're actually losing quality because you're zooming on that. But what you end up doing is you end up getting just a closer view of the area. This is no different than just zooming in by getting a close-up on any type of video, and you don't get any you don't get actually better close-up views, because it's not actually changing anything. When we get so we understand that the judge was playing a major factor. Now he was actually now he, in fact, with it, dropped the gun charge. Now this is one of the factors that one of the people try to bring up. They go, oh, because he dropped the gun charge, because the judge dropped the gun charge, that means that it must be a fact that was not an illegal charge for him to carry a gun. This is one of the things that they tend to want to bring up. Now, we can look at, if we take that actual fact, we can, and this is where I want to bring it up now, is we want to, because when we're talking about the judge, that this is where people that are defenders of Rittenhouse want to bring up. They look at to this fact specifically. And if we bring up this fact of anything a judge or anything a prosecution may drop, that would mean that is not illegal, that is not a criminal act. We found that that in many criminal cases, that you will find many types of things dropped, including homicide charges, including rape charges, across the whole spectrum. And there's a reason why they drop these, is because they're usually focused on the more serious charges that are being done, or ones that have that focus on the most evidence in a case. And this is the reason why, just because they're not going to use redundant charges, and basically you're not going to sentence because if you already have several death sentences that are expected to come down within in a death sentence state with it, elsewhere with it, you're going to go with the strongest cases in those states, or worth a life without parole state. You're going to go with those ones with it there. You're not going to basically go into and include weaker cases. So you're going to drop those cases, or drop lesser charges, like, let's say, theft or things like that. That doesn't mean theft, rioting, looting, destruction of property, assault, that rape charges, that when you get to the point of grand larceny with it, or or even what I call, we've even seen cases of where they're involving for serial killers, even up to the point of some of them have even going into counterfeiting. They're not going to use a counterfeiting charge on a serial killer, like counterfeiting money. They're not even going to waste their time. And so when it comes down to it, they're not going to waste their time on that counterfeiting charge on it, and they're just going to drop those charges because it's pointless to charge them on that. You want to get them on the most serious charge you have something on them with that you can really wrap them up in. And that doesn't mean it's legal just because something is dropped. It just means what it called either a judge or a prosecution are narrowing the scope of the case. And the judge specifically, in this case, we know that he was trying to basically narrow the scope down to basically being either self-defense or homicide. He didn't want any charges to go down into lower than that homicide charge. So he was trying to basically make it to be a black and white case. Black and white in the case where it's either one extreme or the other. So it put the jury in a sense where they would be most likely to go in this way toward what it called toward that, and basically say, well, and try to make the appeal that, well, he's only 18 now with it, and that would ruin his whole life, and try to push this little story of that, and that's why he didn't want to sequester them, because they could then hear these little sob stories on the news of that, how it would ruin his whole life if he were to basically be prosecuted and thrown in jail for the rest of his life on a spree killing, for his act of spree killing, essentially, is what he did. And what we found is that this is where they were really trying to create the realm of what was going on. Now, when we start to look at the point of what else was going on, now this is another major thing, is how the actual jury was picked. And this is something in which is very, very important. Now, if you don't understand with how the jury was picked, that this is something in which almost nobody was covering with it, regardless of which way they swing. Almost nobody was covering with it outside of, like, really, as far as I know, outside of, like, local areas. I think local areas spent a little bit of time with it. Certain national ones spent maybe a little bit of time on how the jury was covered with it, but they only spent a little bit of time. They didn't really discuss of what that actually means for the actual trial, and what they would actually mean for an implication, and number one, why it was odd, number one, and number two, what it actually means for the outcome of a trial, and how it is so important. Number one is letting Rittenhouse be able to eliminate the jurors himself. Now, this wouldn't be a big deal, except he was allowed to use social media. Now, in most cases, this wouldn't be a big deal, except this was a very, very politically charged case. What this means is that when you have a very politically charged case, this means you don't sequester the voters, you don't sequester the jury. What's going to happen is you're going to be left with people who are only going to he's going to look specifically for things like on social media with these people. Who do they support politically? And that's going to be a major factor. It's going to be showing where they're going to get their news. Number one, specifically if they're not going to be sequestered. Because they're going to be watching news, no matter what, specifically national news. So what this means is that if he gets people who are going to be watching news that are going to be favoring his side, this means that he can pretty much get a open and shut case that he's going to be declared innocent. But if he gets people who are maybe don't favor maybe don't favor Trump, maybe are against Trump, this means that he would get people who would be either A, hostile, or B, objective against him, and wouldn't necessarily be would be more likely to listen to the facts of the case. That's not very good in his case, because they're not going to listen to what A, the judge says, and B, they're not going to be listening to what is going on in the news. They're not going to be paying attention to what the pundits are saying, and this is going to be a very big problem for him. They're going to be only paying attention to what's going on in the actual facts of the case, meaning the prosecution's going to would have had a very good shot of this actually passing through. That's not good for him. So what he does is he takes anybody who's actually going to be doing that, he's going to eliminate them. In fact, he didn't even do any type of in fact, out of the whole juror pool, there was actually only one black person. He eliminated them without even any scrutiny. So for people like so for people like Leo Terrell, who are saying like the saying that there was no racial basis to the case, he's completely wrong. When we start to look at the he made this claim that there was no racial basis with this case, and that is completely erroneous. And he made this case on Fox News. Now, he should realize with it that basically eliminating the only black juror in the pool. Now, first of all, when you start to look at demographics, you can see that basically is the way they set up this pool was erroneous to begin with. And we should see that basically that this was made pretty much to be not anywhere close to be within the demographics. Because there was only one black with it, there was no other minorities. We could see that this was basically set up to be an all-white system with it when Kenosha is not all white. .4%. Hispanic of any race with it are just shy of 18%. So frankly, with it, we did not see anywhere close to being representative of the actual region, which is what you should be seeing in the actual pool of. You should be seeing somewhere close on the pool of jurors. Why we saw nothing but why the pool was nothing but white jurors is seems to be very, very suspicious in my opinion. And that should be something that people should be very suspicious in the case. Because when you're just taking a random selection, it should be, it should be within the realm with it. You can give maybe 10 whites, you can give maybe 10% in either direction, but you should still be having more than just one in the pool. And that's something that's very, very suspicious, that we should not be giving any type of credence to if there were only one in the pool. And another part that should be considered very racially biased is that one person was actually eliminated without any questioning. They were eliminated basically because of the color of their skin. They were felt that they would be that they would be biased just because they're black. And because the defendant was allowed to use social media, which no electronic devices should have been allowed to be able to eliminate anyone, it should have only pertained to the questions pertaining to the case. And if you're going to be biased based on those things, they should have been asking those questions. If you're not, you should not be able to eliminate anybody based on those things with it. Otherwise, you need to stay based on it. Nothing else. No electronic devices used to eliminate anyone. Politics should not be used to play, because politics are for outside the courtroom, not for inside the courtroom. They were allowed to be used inside that courtroom, from the judge, from the defense, and from that jury. And if you want to know what actually created the outcome of that trial, it was politics. That judge allowed him to be biased from politics. He allowed the defense to basically use politics, and for the jury to be politically engaged by not being sequestered, and to be eliminated by basically political alignment. And that's why you got the outcome that you did. It had nothing to do with the facts in the case. It had nothing to do with anything else. Now, frankly, if you're going to have a case, it needs to be based solely on the facts. The judge should not be putting his thumb on the scale. You should not be able to have either side, either the prosecution nor the defense, as being able to eliminate people that are based on political alignment. Political alignment and race have no business being used as part of an ability to eliminate people from a case. This is something in which is complete garbage. And we need to understand this. If it's being used with it, you're actually messing around with the actual judgment of the actual case. You're not being able to create an actual case that's actually legitimate. And when we get to these cases, they need to be considered as fair for both the actual victims and the person on trial. It should be considered a fair and neutral system. And I don't want to get to the point to where we actually have to have a digital-based system for judging and for selecting and for a jury. But if it keeps coming down to this, we might have to be doing this, because the fact is the judge and the jury are basically, right now, with a case like this, you're showing that they're tainted with it. Now, we've not always seen this where they're tainted, as we were able to get what seemed to follow the actual facts up in Minnesota with the George Floyd case. That case was able to actually follow the evidence and deliver a proper verdict. I'm not saying I always wanted an actual guilty verdict, or always wanted to swing one way or the other. I'm just saying that I want the actual thing to follow the evidence. If it follows the evidence with it, I am just fine. If it doesn't with it, that is a complete travesty of actual of justice. We have to be able to follow the evidence. If you don't follow the evidence, it's garbage. And you're not doing the proper thing. This is not about trying to play politics in the courtroom. Frankly, we need to get rid of these judges who are actually playing politics in the courtroom. This is not about trying to basically make someone a martyr, and then if they get convicted, and try to use them as a political prop in DC. And they need to stop doing this garbage. And this is what it has become. It's politics has become all this stuff about theatrics instead of actually really representing actual political points of view. And the courtroom has basically become something into basically a political agenda piece. And because you have parties that are trying to represent certain points of view instead of the actual facts. I mean, we had a judge basically in this case state things that, oh, these things are in the Constitution. Where? He was stating things that basically, if so and so does this with it, and it's what gets protected in the Constitution. It's right there. Where? He was making things. We've seen judges make things up that are not in the Constitution in these courtrooms. This is complete and utter nonsense and garbage. We have seen basically where they try to instruct juries to basically lead them into outcomes that they want. Regardless if they're a Democratic judge or Republican judge, they're trying to basically either convict or declare people innocent, regardless of what the facts say. They want to give them instructions that basically lead them into a certain way. And this is basic. They shouldn't be giving them instructions. It's basically clear. They should follow the evidence and then declare either they're innocent or guilty on these specific charges. All they have to do is give them the charges and tell them, are they guilty of these charges? Are they innocent of the charges with it, one by one? Tell them, you have the evidence with it. We gave you the evidence. We have these charges. These are the charges. Define the charges and say, are they guilty of them or are they innocent? That's all they have to do. Or I should say guilty or not guilty in this case. Because that's technically how they read them out. And basically that's all they should be doing. Nothing more. They shouldn't be making these huge, long instructions. There's nothing else. And they make these huge, long, drawn-out instructions that basically make no sense and basically have no bearing. And really, all they're doing is they're basically trying to make these things to where they can actually control the outcome. And we need to actually have this being stopped with it, because this is where we see these cases going to becoming 100% political. And I don't know if you thought these nationalist agitators were going to go out and riot, and that's the reason why that the judge did this, or some type of reason. If Rittenhouse was thrown in jail, and this was the sole reason why he did this. But frankly, this is something in which was complete garbage. That you don't put your thumb on the scale, and while this is basically politically, obviously they lose their martyr, because they when it comes down to politics, they can't run and say, oh, see what the court system did with it, the liberal court system. It threw an innocent person in jail, and where they can't run on that with it. they can't run on him being a martyr with it, which when it comes down to politically, where the Republicans or the nationalist Republican Party can't run on that. They can't run on all that garbage with it, so they can't be pulling that trash when it comes down to the midterms. So they did lose that as well. They did lose that. So the fact is that when we see that is that he's not that they're not going to gain anything from that with this. They did lose kind of their only piece that they were going to run with the midterms. But when it comes down to the whole thing with it, this is showing where the actual court cases are going in the country. They're not actually looking at things through the eye of the Constitution. They're looking at things of how can we gain politically. Now the judges are basically going to be looking at things maybe on a local level politically. The individuals are going to be basically are obviously going to be looking at self-interest with it, so they're always going to be using politics to their own advantage with it, to where saying, hey, if I get everybody lined in the jury on my side, then I can basically win a court case and get a judge on my side politically. And this is what ends up happening with it. And that's why you get these why you also find judge shopping as well. And don't just say that what the judge shopping happens by Democrats. It happens by Republicans. And just, in fact, with it, Trump does it all the time. Trump did it all the time, but he would actually look for judge shopping so that he can keep his little unconstitutional executive orders through. That basically, that once they moved up with it, they most of them be removed, except during the pandemic, when judges were essentially turning a blind eye to these things, with it being that there were far more important issues at the time, that a lot of these other ones with it were basically ignored, because a lot of the pandemic based issues with it took precedent over actual national and domestic and international policy issues that we saw. And so we've seen in the court system that basically that we've seen that these abuses of the system has been taking place from both sides. And in fact, in many cases, Republicans have been abusing it far more often, specifically under Trump, because Trump has a history of abusing the court system. And I'm basically going to cut it here with it, because we've gone over how politicization is actually what created the actual monster of this case and the outcome of the case. And that basically that facts never mattered in the case whatsoever, and that the case was really decided before the actual initial first day had actually started. It was actually done by the actual jury selection and the actual conduct of the actual judge himself, which he was showing his conduct well before the actual case itself had started with it, by giving a spree killer bond, when you would never see anything like this ever with it, no matter what age of the killer. We've seen other cases like the Brenda Spencer case with it, to where as far as I know, she was she was when she was picked up with it, she was not she was not given as far as I know, she was what it called. They didn't give her any type of ability to be out before the trial with it on bond, like we saw with the case of uh, with Rittenhouse. Yet with Brenda Spencer. Yet and she was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. And yet we see the fact is that she was given that one, given a what are called 25 years to life sentence with that, when she actually had underlying uh, cases in which underlying things with it that would have possibly led to her being uh, getting some type of getting some getting some type of ability to say that she shouldn't have been treated as harshly, and she would have got just as much as Rittenhouse. She was given 2 counts of murder, 1 count of assault with a deadly weapon, pretty much same exact thing as Rittenhouse. It's identical. Yet she got 25 years to life with life. She did injure more people with it, with injuring 9 with it, but basically, so she did injure more. But when it come down to what they actually charged with it, they only charged her with the 3 counts with it, just like Rittenhouse. Yet you don't see her you didn't see them allowing her to basically say, well, I was what it called, well, it was self-defense. And trying to use that thing with it because they were trying to stop her from shooting people. And that was the what it called. You don't see that being allowed as an actual charge with it. And that's the case with it, that it's identical to that it's really very, very similar to the case of Rittenhouse. Yet we see Rittenhouse basically free, and she's going to be up for parole uh, in 2022, but not likely to get it. And she had a Ruger 1022 semi-automatic rifle, which is not too different than a AR-15, which an AR-15 could. Which, if you look at it, it's which you can which you can go from what it called for varying different in HMR all the way up to what is this? This is to the adapted for a 50 BMG, but cartridges will not feed, but which are used for in rifle, which the receiver functions only as a trigger group with it. But basically, you can go with but you can get up to yeah, the original AR cartridge is basically 223 Remington. Which is kind of a variant of the 308 Winchester. So basically, it's the so basically it's pretty much and when we're talking, what is it for? And depending on the what it calls on the grain amount between about 959 all the way up to about 13 38 for feet per second when it comes down to for speed, depending on its usage. And when we're talking about this, that this is basically what he's using. He's not. He most likely used the standard one with it. I don't think it was a modified. It's not likely that it's modified. So it goes down to basically being that he didn't that he was basically going. And if we look at the last part with it is, I mean, looking when we look at all the evidence with it, people try to claim that what he was. This is I want to go to the last piece of evidence with it, which is they try to claim that basically his backing up into the different cars is a version of showing that he is was actually showing self-defense. Now, anybody who's actually played any type of game or any type of video game in which you're showing that you are haven't used guns, in which you're basically going against an opponent or anything like that, like a first-person shooter or something similar to that line, or some type of action game, one of the biggest things you want to do with it is you want to lure your opponent in some type of narrow area so you can gun them down easier because they can't really get out, where they can't actually move side to side and avoid your fire. And if you look at what he actually did, he wasn't actually basically running away, but he was actually backing up. Now, what he was actually backing up was actually more that he was actually trying to lure the person in there. Now, the person was trying to, what looks like, trying to actually stop him from firing or potentially firing at someone with it, trying maybe possibly knock down the barrel, or at worst, this is with Rosenbaum, possibly knock down the barrel, disarm him possibly with it, maybe now we can't hear on the actual audio, possibly Rittenhouse had already made threats to fire at this point, because there would have been no reason for Rosenbaum to actually proceed forward. So we know that Rittenhouse had to have done something to actually get him to proceed forward, because there'd be no person in their right minds who would actually want to be proceeding forward at a gun. So what Rittenhouse was doing was essentially backing in between pickup trucks. Now, where you saw Rittenhouse at the end was in kind of a cross area between pickup trucks, meaning he could move back and forth. He was perfectly safe. Now, where Rosenbaum was not. Rosenbaum was actually stuck between pickup trucks, meaning he's a sitting duck. Meaning basically that if you shoot at him with it, he's basically sitting there he can't go anywhere. That if he tries to back up, he can't turn around. He has to basically retreat by walking backwards, because the cars are closely parked. You can't just do a 180 right there with it, especially if you have someone pointing a gun directly at you. You're not going to do a 180 with it out of fear of them shooting in the back of the head with it. So basically, he's kind of stuck there. So what Rittenhouse does is Rittenhouse shoots him right in the hip. He goes falling forward, and Rittenhouse does 3 more shots with it, including grazing his hand, grazing his scalp, and shooting him in the back. The shot in the back is actually first shot in the hip actually incapacitates him, and the shot in the back, the other 2 were superficial, and the shot in the back actually takes him out and kills him. And these were actually key things with it to note. And anybody who knows anything on any type of video gaming and these types of things with it, you realize that this was basically a set trap. Being that Rittenhouse knew where those cars were. He knew what he was doing. He knew that he was luring Rosenbaum right there. This was a set kill. This was to basically lure Rosenbaum in there so that he can kill him. This was not set up to basically, I'm going to basically defend myself. If he's going to defend himself, there's open area. Rosenbaum is not armed. You can run. You're armed. Rosenbaum's not. You're in open area. You can just take off. You don't walk between cars unless you're trying to lure someone. If you're trying to lure someone to basically gun them down, that's where you go. And that was a clear-cut thing with it. This was something in which people were not paying attention to. And this is something is an easy tactic to do. And you'll find it in a lot of video games with it. What you do is you lure them in to a very, very close quarters area, and then you can kill them very, very easily with it. This is essentially what Rittenhouse was doing. And being that Rittenhouse wanted to play, as always wanted to be in the military or in the cops, as wanted to play in these high action situations, he is definitely familiar with these different tactics like this. I can guarantee you. These tactics might not be used in a military setting, obviously, because you don't know if that other person has backup, and you're not always going to be dealing with people that are less armed than you. And that's the whole thing. You never want to be putting yourself in that situation. You're going to be more into an actual military situation, so you would never do this. and meaning that you would never put yourself in that situation because you could actually get yourself killed. But if the person is not as armed as you, maybe they could still be physically bigger than you, but if they're not as well armed as you, that means they're a sitting duck because they can't go anywhere. But if they're equally armed, that becomes a firefight right in a close quarters situation. And that's what we were seeing right there. And what we could have seen right there if both were easily armed. But Rittenhouse would have never done that. Rittenhouse would have never done that if Rosenbaum was armed. If Rosenbaum was armed, Rosenbaum could have easily taken him out in the open area. And I don't think Rittenhouse would have even crossed over if people would have been equally armed like that. He would have never done that because the fact is he would have been easily gunned down. The reason why he went over with it is because he assumed that they weren't armed. That at best with it, they didn't have the arms that these nationalist agitators had. That was the whole idea. That basically you were more well armed than they are. Meaning, basically, if you wanted to go kill someone, and if you want to trap someone like that, you can do it. Now, what he didn't expect was that basically after shooting someone, that people were actually going to take whatever they have and try to attack him, try to take out an active shooter. He didn't expect they were going to think, we're going to take out this active shooter. He didn't expect them to do that. He expected them to basically just bend down and just cower with an active shooter, how the right-wing media has portrayed it. Except these people aren't going to do it because they're not going to just basically say, I'm willing to die to an active shooter. He didn't realize that there's a thing called self-interest, that they don't want to die to an active shooter. He was listening to far too much right-wing media to actually understand that. That's why he ended up getting basically attacked. And he doesn't understand, like, when these school shootings happen, that you end up getting people trying to take out the shooter. That's usually why you get some of these other people a couple of people who may end up dying, but eventually the shooter is taken out. And either A, arrested, or B, this shooter is basically apprehended or possibly killed because of after maybe a couple people die. This is what ends up happening. And this is where people need to, this is what he didn't realize, that it was more like that than what he was being told about these unrest areas with it when you bring a gun to the area. He thought when you bring a gun to the area, they just basically back down and all of a sudden you're going to shoot as many of them as you want. He thought that this was the way it goes. Well, he learned a whole new story of the whole thing with it, that they're going to take anything they have to basically protect themselves. He learned the whole thing with it, that just because you have a gun doesn't mean that you're going to actually not be attacked. If you start attacking people unprovoked, you're going to basically be attacked yourself. And that's what ended up happening with it. He was not prepared for that. And that's where you end up he ended up basically hitting one person with it and basically killing another. And that's where we found him do that. And that was really pretty much the facts of the case, that's where we wanted to actually dispute some of these people that are trying to do that and trying to basically make him out to be a hero. He's not a hero. He's number one, an idiot. Number two, he's prone to violence, as we see this with it. I mean, there's plenty of video with it that we have that he was actually assaulting an 8-year-old girl from earlier in the day, which basically was the reason why he was let go as a as a lifeguard from Kenosha. That was not had nothing to do with with the shooting. Had to do with basically with his conduct. So he's prone to He's prone to violence. Basically, that has to do with his with low IQ. Basically, he can't handle any stressful situation. And anytime someone basically confronts him and basically challenges him, he will actually resort to violence. And especially if he's around his little buddies, little nationalist buddies. And when it comes down to it, that's what would end up occurring. And we found the same thing with this whole thing. Whenever he's basically encouraged with that, he's very, very easily manipulated. And this is the thing with it where he he's not going to basically amount to anything. And this is just something about him with it. When you get someone who doesn't have any skills in life whatsoever. And I mean, we have evidence that he failed the military entrance, the army entrance exam, which, I mean, I think my mom stated the best, that even my niece could pass that one. And it shows how lowbrow he is with it. The army even felt that him as a risk, but that he dropped out of high school, so he's not exactly someone who's actually going to go anywhere. And why the GOP should even consider him as something to be praised is beyond me. There's plenty of other people that we can actually praise out there that have actually made something of themselves with it, yet they don't want to do that. They actually want to praise a spree killer. I mean, there's a list of serial killers out there if they want to do it, and there's far better out there. If you want actually a smart serial killer, you can actually they have Edmund Kemper. Edmund Kemper is actually a smart serial killer. They want to do a serial killer, at least get a smart one, not someone who's the bottom of the barrel. I mean, if you're going to do a spree killer or a serial killer with it, at least get someone who's smart that you're actually going to praise. And I think that would be far better. You have Edmund Kemper out in California with it. Frankly, with it, that would be a far better person to praise than someone who's bottom of the barrel. You don't want to be praising someone who's basically complete and utter trash, and who's not going to amount to anything with it. I mean, I'd rather have Edmund Kemper, who's at least wrote Braille for blind people as well. I mean, he's a brilliant man with it. Obviously, he is a serial killer with it, but the fact is, at least he has the intelligence to back his butt up with it on top of it, which at least gives him some type of value as a human being. Rittenhouse has no value that he's even contributed anything, and he won't have any value with it. He's basically beyond these nationalists that are trying to use him as a prop. Once that prop wears out, once nationalism dies, he's going to be working minimum wage jobs, nothing more. He's going to become a burger flipper at McDonald's until basically, actually not even that, probably going to be working in the front of McDonald's, because they usually don't allow those types of people working in the back. So he's going to become working basically drive-through or working the cashier at McDonald's or something like that, until basically until you get to the point to where everything gets automated and then he has nowhere to work. He will have some menial job with it that he's going to have to start searching around for with it, until a lot of those menial jobs keep going away and going away and going away, and he'll have nothing to do. And he'll become an actual drain on the economy. I'm basically going to cut it right here, and that's about it, and bye everyone.